I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend and week after we met each other last week. It looks like nobody's joining me today, so I'm going to go through the best I can. We're talking about both China and India today, and a couple of the videos that I have posted regarding Indian art are in Hindi. So I'm going to do the best I can to find equivalent videos so that I can post them in English. And we're going to look at a couple things that are very gender specific and that need some very specific context to view, and some other things where the gender aspect of the art may not be nearly as apparent. So it'll take a little bit of exploration, intellectual exploration, to kind of compare what you see with what you know already and apply the tools of artistic critique. China is this red area and India is this blue area. Now, of course, this is a rather distorted map. It doesn't really show the true relative sizes of everything. But China is gigantic and India is gigantic. And between the two of them, I think they hold at least a quarter of the world's population. Huge amount of people. But they also have a huge amount of history. Chinese history, recorded history, goes back at least 3,500 years. And before that, the history is from the Xia dynasty, which is considered to be more of a mythical history. It's the era that fantasy stories and stuff like that are housed in for both the art world and contemporary science fiction fantasy writing. It's kind of like if in the West we said, okay, the history of England ends in 300 AD, and before that is the time period of Lord of the Rings. It's good. It's interesting to know, but it's also important to know because a lot of later artistic devices and symbolism refer to the mythic times. India has a history that goes back quite a bit farther. There's a group of scriptural writings, and I'm sorry if my shoulders look lopsided. That's not the case at the same height, but for whatever reason, the camera blurs out one shoulder and makes it look like I'm leaning over, and I'm not. But Indian history goes back quite a ways. You don't want to say Indian because you're afraid it might be confusing. Another correct word is Indic. That also means from India. Example of two different groups of people. There are 56 different ethnic groups in China, and there's over 2,000 in India. So a lot of history, a lot of stuff in between them. Fossils of our human ancestors have been found in this area that go back to about 400,000 BC. Just an incredibly long time. It wasn't necessarily modern humans, but our ancestors like the Cro-Magnon, the Neanderthal, and the Denisovans. I believe I'm still sharing. As you go into this, I would like you to pause before going through the rest of the module and go back to that page where we talk about the 4 tools of artistic critique. Describe, analyze, interpret, and evaluate. And remember, as you look at this art, just like every other set of art that we look at, do your best to try to keep the context in your mind for what the art is, from the source that the art is presented, because it is inappropriate and really unfair to the work of the people that made the art, as well as the art itself, to try to overlay our own contemporary context and viewpoints on something that comes from a very different culture. For Westerners, regardless of whether or not you identify as a Christian, our culture is based on some very some ideas that are very specific to the history of Christianity and the children of the book in particular. The children of the book are the religions that use the Bible as their foundation. Our legal system is based on a punitive justice system, which has its foundations in the Ten Commandments in the Old Testament and Mosaic law. And that's very Judeo-Christian, but it also is very Islamic, because Islam, Sharia, has its basis in Old Testament law. And these all hover around the idea that there is a benevolent deity, and that is so ingrained in us that whether or not we are a believer, sometimes it's really difficult to wrap our heads around the social and spiritual structures of cultures that don't have that as a background. There are a lot of Christians and a lot of monotheistic religions in India and China, but the majority of the cultural momentum has been guided over the years by some very specific non-Western traditions. And in this, I wanted to show you this. This is a Neolithic terracotta piece. I believe it's the top of a vessel, but I just thought it was interesting enough. It actually comes from some of the excavations being done in China, I believe in Western China. This first video is 2,000 years of Chinese history. I want you to watch that because that gives the history of China for the 4 different dynasties up to about 400 AD. And it's a very consolidated, concise history. It's about 12 minutes long. And what I like about it is that it also talks about this idea of mandate of heaven. It's similar to the divine right of kings that is prevalent in Western folklore tradition, and still actually in contemporary culture too. I mean, that's why King Charles of England is accepted. That's the whole setup for his crowning and his mother's crowning before him is in an area that is specifically designated as a holy site, so that his reign is sanctioned by the divine. The mandate of heaven, as it is expressed in ancient Chinese culture, and as we get closer even to more contemporary times, is the idea that if an emperor or king is overthrown, then that means that they do not have the right to continue because they lost their mandate. If somebody new rises to power, that means they must have the mandate. And this became an informational device used by subsequent rulers to house the history of earlier cultures, so that they could prove their legitimacy and right to reign. So that's a very important video. We're not gonna watch it right now. I did want to share. I have 3 one-minute videos that talk about the primary religious basis for what is Chinese art. So let's see if we can. Sorry, there's an ad. We're going to get rid of the ad.
I'm sure you've seen Buddhist monks in martial arts movies. You've heard of meditation retreats. You've seen those big fat Buddhist statues at your aunt's house. But what is Buddhism? And what do Buddhists actually believe? That's what we're going to cover today. Buddhism follows the teachings of the Buddha, or the Awakened One. I won't go into the story of Siddhartha.
Okay, this one, the others I think are only about a minute long. But this talks about Buddhism. It's a religion that's based on the concept of the eightfold path, which is essentially a set of guidelines to learn how to behave correctly, with the idea being that moral life is equated with suffering. In order to grow beyond suffering, we need to lose attachment to the physical things and objects and relationships around us. And once that happens, we can gain enlightenment and lose our limited identity as suffering mortal beings. So salvation, if that's going to be an equivalent term in Buddhism, is not the same as going to heaven and spending the rest of eternity with the divine creator figure, but rather it is a loss of those things that we can identify with the ego and everything that receives suffering. So it's quite a bit of a different view or perspective on life and the afterlife. But what's fascinating is that the Eightfold Path resonates very well with people who are the Judeo-Christian and Muslim background, because it resonates strongly with the Ten Commandments. Now, Confucius is an interesting character because, I'm sorry, you heard that, but we're not watching it. Sorry about that. Confucius is an interesting character because he was a government official, and he wanted to develop a code of ethics that helped maintain a harmonious society. And what that meant for him is that relationships needed to be preserved and respected. So there are several different principal relationships, and they revolve around things like respecting your elders, caring for children, and being able to work well with others, knowing the hierarchy at your job, for example. But as with a lot of these ancient paths of faith or paths of ethics, women were pretty much left out. It's written primarily for men and from the male perspective, and if between men and women, the male is the one that the woman needs to show deference towards. If everything else is being equal. What is interesting, though, is this is another big thing that fused with Buddhism governs a lot of the artistic or a lot of the social relationships and artistic considerations in China still to this day. So there are a series of very specific relationship dynamics that a Confucianist will follow, but Confucianism is one of the things that guides a lot of the traditional arts too. Like, for example, landscape painting is very Confucianist. And then the third path of faith that is consistent with Chinese culture is Taoism, or following the Tao. And I really appreciate this in one word.
Emphasizes non-action, Taoism or Tao.
This series of videos tries to talk about world religions from the perspective of narrowing it down to one word. And this is what we've been talking about when we talk about issues of flow state. That's a very Taoist idea.
Taoism originated in China by a man called Lao Tzu, although this has been debated. and the book that contains its doctrines called Tao Te Ching. It emphasizes non-action action or effortless action, not to be confused with laziness or lack of action, but effortless action. The word that describes Taoism is flow. A good example would be a flow that artists and athletes experience when they are in the zone. Their best comes out without much effort as they become one with their work. It focuses on spontaneity, flowing like a river. The literal meaning is the way or course of nature, not resisting.
I do want to. I love this panel that uh, the um, the video maker shows us, because this is a good illustration of how gender is portrayed as well in this kind of a setting, in a Taoist setting. You have a woman on the left who is in flowing robes, and then the flautist on the right are all women with their hair done up. They're dressed differently than the woman in the robe, but these are very obviously flutes that they are playing. So there's this idea that the feminine figure is associated with calm, meditation, and beautiful flowing states. The underpinnings of Taoism, it sounds like it would be laziness when you do without doing, but what it actually is I don't know if you've ever watched a musician who's really, really good. And I'm thinking of Yo-Yo Ma. He did the cellist, or the cello music for the soundtrack of the movie Hero. What Yo-Yo Ma does is every morning he practices scales for 1 to 2 hours first thing when he gets up. And he is the world's most accomplished cellist. What that allows him to do, though, is when he plays his music, he doesn't have to think and ponder and concern himself with every single note or tweak of a string, because he's able to relax himself into that sea of muscle memory that he has developed with all of his practicing. So when we view him playing the cello, it looks completely effortless. And that's kind of a better description of what the Tao is. So those three things, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, are the three isms that really have made up um, the cognitive gestalt for Chinese artists since about 400 BC or so. And you can kind of see that in art, especially when we look at landscape paintings and things like that.
I had a quick thought.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did not even know that somebody else was here. Hold on a second.
No,
That is hilarious.
I didn't know either.
Because I have my screens in front of me and I can't see the video. All right, yes. What is your thought?
Oh, okay. So I served my mission in Taiwan, and I guess at that time I probably should have tried to understand their religions a little better, but I kind of grouped all three of those isms into one religion. And when we were teaching them, I'm like, wow, it would have been really nice to know all these things, because I could have compared it to other things that we were teaching. But with Taoism, I think it's interesting because a lot of the um, Taiwanese people that believed that were Taoist, they would say phrases. They had like these phrases that they would come up with that they would kind of use when they're confronted with a problem or confronted with us as missionaries. And they would say, "It is what it is," or "You can't think about that too much." And they would also say, let nature take its course. And so I always thought that was interesting that they would say that, but now it makes more sense talking about it. That's like, it is what it is. Like they kind of just let it come and go.
Well, and that's really funny because in Islam, there's a phrase that's used quite a bit that means God has willed it so. And that phrase is inshallah. And that's what you say when your guest is late, or when you're late to an appointment, or when somebody doesn't show up exactly when you expect, or things like that happen. You say, well, that's just the way it is. And I think that's interesting that two very different faith paths would have such a strong parallel of ideas. But I can imagine as a Western missionary, that can get just a wee bit frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, they would always say, it is what it is, or let nature take its course. And then we'd be like, it's what God wants it to be, and God will take his course. And they didn't like that, but it was fun.
Well, and it's fascinating to me too. Growing up, I dealt with a lot of, I had some health issues, and I had to learn quite a bit about pain management and stress. And in that kind of journey, I explored Taoism quite a bit, as well as the next culture, the Hinduism. And I found that for getting into the flow state as an artist, that Taoist perspective, or what we label as a Taoist perspective, can be really helpful. When we shut off everything to kind of listen to what the medium wants us to do. But it also reminds me of Albrecht Dürer, was talking about something very similar in his essay, the Pillars of Art. When he talks about the flow state, instead of referencing the Tao, of course he's a German Christian, he referenced losing yourself in a sea of inspiration. So they both are dealing with getting rid of the really oversensitive ego, and they arrive at it from different angles. And I think that the danger, just from a philosophical standpoint, of either of those perspectives is losing sight that ultimately you have the choice and you have the responsibility. So I think that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. That's really cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I am going to, now that I know that you're here, Morgan, I'm going to be a little bit more responsive to human beings. Let's
Okay,
see.
sounds good.
But I'm going to go back and share this. So those three things, the only real religion among this is Buddhism. Confucianism is more of a philosophical or ethics construct, and Taoism is one of those things where people will have faith in a Tao and view it as a religion, but it almost sits in a realm like hoodoo, where it's not quite how we would think of it as religion, being Westerners. So which I just think is really interesting, but it does fit beautifully. It dovetails beautifully into a Buddhist worldview as well. I do have there's a few videos of different works to look at, and as we're doing this, hopefully, Morgan, you'll help me just to look at this art from the perspective of is there a gender is there a gender environment within the art, or is that too much projecting? And I think there's an argument to be made for both of those perspectives. Sometimes, like sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. It doesn't have to necessarily be a gendered thing when you look at art, but sometimes art is very specifically gendered just because of the way it is, as opposed to what it's depicting. This is art from the Han Dynasty, and the Han Dynasty is the dynasty that immediately came after the Qin Dynasty. The Qin Dynasty only lasted a very short amount of time. Emperor Qin was the one, he has the terracotta army that everybody's so amazed with. But the Emperor Qin, there's a story about him. I have no idea how true the story is, But what's interesting about the story is it does inform a lot of people's perspective on Emperor Qin, where a poor farmer decided that he was going to speak for his village and traveled to the emperor and asked the emperor to be merciful when it came to taxes. So he finally got to the emperor's court, and on a whim, they let him in to see the emperor. And when he got his audience, he told the emperor, you know, with all these wars and all the children that we've lost, we really do not have any money to pay taxes with. Can we please be, you know, we promise we will remain your loyal subjects, but can we please be absolved of paying our taxes that you require? And Emperor Qin said, I promise you this, by the time you get to your home, no one in your village will ever have to pay taxes again. So this guy was elated, and he went home fairly quickly. But as he approached, he saw pillars of smoke on the horizon. When he got there, he found that Emperor Qin had sent his army to completely destroy every living thing in the village and burn it down to the ground. And so even though subsequent dynasties made use of the fact that Qin had consolidated the warring states into the country of China, they did not look very kindly on him. And it's, you look at the terracotta army, and there's not an awful lot of those soldiers who are smiling. But some of this art, I wanted to look at it. Hopefully you guys can see. Yeah, Morgan, you can see this video, right?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. I'm going to open it up. Hopefully you can still see it. As we look at this, I'm thinking I may just turn the sound off. Look at these sculptures. They are, some of these are incredibly old. Han Dynasty is, you're talking 200 BC to about 400 AD. So these things are all about 2,000 years old. And these sculptures are of clay. And this particular sculpture is of a dancing woman. And when we saw that earlier piece with the Taoist person, the Taoist principles being discussed, we saw this woman who was dancing with the flowing robes, and that Han Dynasty woman, this figure looks very similar. She has that kind of flowing robe. She's static, but it looks like she's still in a state of flow, which I think is interesting. And this to me reads more of something of a Confucian underpinning to it, because these people are demonstrating stable relationships. You know, they're playing a game, and there's not an awful lot of frenetic movement or anything like that, and the game is intentful. And that's why I'd say it's Confucian as opposed to Taoist, because Confucianism demonstrates proper social order, and with Taoism, I don't know if you are a true Taoist. I don't know how many board games you'd be playing. It'd be kind of difficult to understand that. And then this we have, and the other thing that's interesting is, excuse me, we see those chess players are men. This is something that was really interesting. The earlier Zhou dynasties and Zhang were very much about ancestor veneration. And when you get to Qin, Emperor Qin, with the terracotta army, demonstrated that it was he wanted to shift away from ancestor veneration to have his descendants venerate him. So it became a much more personal kind of aspect of veneration. And these little containers are things that were made during the Han Dynasty to be buried with the people that had died, as a way for the family to give them things to take with them into the next realm of existence. And here we see, actually I'm going to bring it back, we see this pot that has kind of a mixture of things, where you have a functional pot, You have a house that looks like something that you would want to take with you into the next life. And then you have these servants around here. And these servants, when we get in close, look to me. Well, Morgan, what gender do these servants look like?
It's a little blurry, but I want to say, man, it's so hard to tell. I want to say they look female because I feel like their facial features are softer.
Yeah, that's the kind of feel that I got too. But it does seem to make sense because this is in a culture where the man was ascendant and the woman was subservient. So it does seem to make sense to me. So that
They're doing kind of
whoever
that.
this was buried with, the women, what's that?
I'm sorry. I just said it looked like they were kind of doing that peaceful meditating thing that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, it does, definitely. I've read a number of art. Okay, this is a sculpture. This looks like Gautama Buddha or Siddhartha. And what's interesting about Buddha sculptures from this time period is that they are a lot less gender specific than later Buddha sculptures. Like everybody's gone into one of like a noodle house or a Chinese restaurant. You see the happy Buddha that is supposed to bring prosperity, right at the front of the restaurant. Kind of a fun thing, but he is obviously male. And when Buddha came on the scene quite a while ago, as people started venerating him and his avatars, they were sculptures from about 2,000 years ago were a lot less gender specific than sculptures a couple hundred years more recent to us today. And until now, it's very rare to see anything other than a masculine Buddha sculpture. Like on this, it is not quite in focus, but we can see there's the flat chest, which is usually an indicator it's male, but the face is very round. And the hands are usually depicted as being very delicate, not the hands of a laboring man at all. And then you have delicate folds of clothing, but then we also see other depictions of things too. This to me looks masculine. This to me looks a little bit more feminine. And I wonder if that's because facial features, it looks like there's a beard here and this is unbearded, which, it could be that this is a young man depiction. I would recommend watching this video and just seeing what you can find out. This is a really good example of a non-gendered style Buddha type sculpture. I don't think this is of the Buddha. Usually the Buddha will have like a knowledge bump or a vertical hair bun to denote that it's a Buddha, but this is another one of these androgynous figures, which I think is interesting because a lot of the times androgyny was used not because people wanted to undefine a deity's gender, but more to make that deity feel accessible to every gender. So you get this idea of androgyny being shown in artwork to make it more accessible. And here's another example. Would you say that these two faces look more masculine or feminine?
Man, I think I would say feminine. Not
It
positive.
definitely looks like that. Yeah, but I don't. I'm thinking if one is one and one is the other, this is probably feminine. This is probably masculine, but I don't know. But it is interesting that the artist made conscious decisions to pull back from obvious gender identifiers. And what is fascinating to me is that when that's done in a setting where there's a good chance that the sculpture is either a depiction of Buddha or to be referenced with the Buddha, you get the same kind of style of androgynous face, where it pulls back from obvious masculinity. I love these little alabaster and ivory figures. Look how tiny that is. It looks to me like it's a flute player. Yeah. But would you say this is masculine or feminine?
This one looks more masculine to me.
Yeah, it does to me too. It looks more like a young man without the
Yeah.
beard as opposed to a woman. And I think the artist is able to communicate some of those masculine indicators in there. I think you're absolutely right. But did you see how tiny this thing was? That is a lot of detail. And this is out of alabaster, and he's holding this flute here that is separate from his body. That shows an awful lot of dexterity. And this guy, whoever carved this, really knew their stuff.
And alabaster is a lot harder to carve into, isn't it?
It depends on the tools you have access to.
Okay.
It is not very forgiving, though.
Okay.
You screw up with alabaster, and I mean that's it. You're done.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very, very stressful. Now this, I don't know what kind of a gender could we. Is there enough of an indicator to talk about gender with this piece?
I don't know.
My suspicion.
It's
What's that?
well from my end. It's really blurry, but
It's really
cool.
blurry here too. This area almost makes me think of a beard.
Yeah.
And this style of helmet from the time is consistent with military helmets. So I'm thinking this might be a man, and I wonder who is behind him. Is this almost looks like a smaller figure, like it's a child, but it could be a woman too. That's interesting. Now, this is an example of we can project gender onto things like this quite easily. This is hammered metal, a plate or bowl, and there's flowers on it. But in this context, flowers don't indicate that this belonged to a woman. Flowers may indicate, flowers in this context usually indicate that you're supposed to be mindful of the traits the flowers represent. Like, for example, some flower species that you see will represent wisdom and other strength, some kindness and charity, some benevolence. And in some settings, they can be gender specific. In other settings, they can't be. So before we can make any determinants about this, we would need to find out if there's enough information to identify the species of flower, and then we can use that to kind of inform us as to whether or not this is a gendered implement. I have read articles where art historians have talked about how pots and bowls are more feminine than plates. And I don't know, for our intents and purposes, I think maybe that's going a little bit too far when we talk about gender. But there are some indicators, like on this, even though there's a flower, this is an animal. And it looks like an animal that was probably hunted. It looks something like a deer, or it could be a dog. And in that case, whoever owned this bowl was probably a man, because with the spots on this and the way it's sitting, I'm going to guess that this is either going to be like a fawn to be hunted, or I don't know where that tuft is. If that's hair, then might very well be a hunting dog, and that they're showing the pattern of fur or the pattern coloration on the dog. But usually when there are animals like this that we could at least associate with an activity like hunting, then the item becomes gendered. And it's relatively easy to do that too. A lot of the times, all we got to think about is our own cultural stereotypes sometimes, and they seem appropriate, sadly. Now we look at this next video talks about dragons. And dragons, all the Chinese dancing dragons are named after generals. And a lot of them will come from the Han Dynasty. And they represent this, some of the dragons are feminine and some of the dragons are masculine, believe it or not. And they all seem to be behaving, though, well, I'm not going to say that. I have seen a dragon dance done where there was a masculine dragon and a feminine dragon. And even though they looked the same to me, the dragons did, somehow the kung fu masters that were dancing in the female dragon were able to give it a sense of femininity. I have no idea how they did that. And the information I'm getting that I'm sharing with you is from my sister-in-law, who has been a kung fu practitioner for the last 25 years. And she's really gone deep into the culture. During my master's, she came and with her troupe, and they performed a dragon dance for me as well, which was pretty cool. There's also gardens. There's these are cloisonne vases, and this is something that kind of bothers me. Are there any of these vessels that we can read as masculine or feminine? You know, how can we do that? I imagine if they're specifically used for different things, maybe we can. But sometimes this lens of gender that at moments we're incentivized to really assert over the objects that we examine, sometimes it makes a lot less sense than other times. I think the only way to really tell if these vessels are masculine or feminine are going to be the decorations on them. That's my suspicion. What do you think, Morgan?
I think I agree with you. I was just thinking back to, again, I'm comparing a lot of this to when I was in Taiwan, but there was a lot of all art that I came across that was really famous in Taiwan was done by males. So I just think that's really interesting. I don't know if that means that's like the majority. It's just from what I experienced when I was there. But there was a man in Taiwan that would make fans for the missionaries and he would paint them. And it was just really interesting to see like his shop and how beautiful and florally and embellished these fans were. And this big, strong Taiwanese man was the one carving and making them. So I don't know. Like you said, we just have these gender lenses on. And if I would have just seen a fan, I would have just thought it was a woman just because of how pretty they were. But it was not.
Yeah. How do you? Yeah, I agree. Sometimes I think we definitely go overboard trying to gender everything, but it can be a little bit unsettling because again we're wearing our Western expectation glasses, and you know we see something like that and it's really startling. I had a friend who is very masculine. He's Polynesian. He comes from Hawaii. He does traditional carving, and he'll do traditional carving with these beautiful, delicate flowers covering the surface of the wood, and it's you look at that and you expect that the person who's going to use it is going to be a woman, and maybe that's true and she's going to really enjoy it, but it's the same kind of unsettling thing to see a very masculine person doing something so delicate is kind of interesting at the very least. I think that one of the things that we can say about something like this is that there's a good chance it probably was done by a man. During this time, most of the pottery shops, the designers were men. I mean, there were still women that were employed in pottery shops, but I think in large part, probably because of the Confucian perspective, their work was rarely credited, if at all. And most of the work done was credited to men. Whether or not they actually made it all, I doubt it, but the work was still credited to men. That's kind of wild. What I'm seeing in this, I see a man riding a horse. I see this looks like a man, this looks like a man. This looks like a boy. I don't see a single woman in this except for here. This could be the only woman. That is really interesting. I wish the pictures were better. Of course, here, it's very obviously it's a man. Now this vessel, is there any way to tell what the gender of the person who used this? It looks like a beautiful vessel that would grace a wealthy person's home, and so the wealthy person would probably want to have it displayed, and so it might very well belong to a man, but that's just overlaying my own expectations on it. So I think that those kind of conversations are really fascinating because sometimes there's absolutely no way of knowing. And I'm going to bring up something else. Let me make sure that I don't have the sound on. There we go. I really like the Smart History videos because the people that speak in them really know their stuff. So I'm going to turn the mute off so we can listen to them for a little bit just to talk about it. And again, consider this is quite a bit older. I wonder if there's any clues that would let us know the gender of the individuals who made them. I have my suspicions, but let's find out.
Gallery is devoted to the art of ancient China, and we're looking at an object that is about 4,500 years old. It is this beautiful.
Think about that. This vessel is incredibly detailed, and it is almost 5,000 years old. Isn't that amazing? That blows me away.
Jar.
The jar has a round foot and it widens from the foot towards two lug handles that are situated at the waist of the vessel and then continues to widen and then narrow in towards a tall round neck.
And the ceramics are so beautifully crafted that at first glance, I would assume that this was made on a wheel because it is so perfectly round and the transitions of the shape are so smooth and so regular. But in fact, this was not made on a wheel. This is made using a coil method where snakes of clay are rolled together, they're stacked, they're smoothed, and so this object is hand built.
The vessel.
That is pretty amazing to me. And I talk a little bit about where this comes from, Banshan culture. So they predate the Zhao by quite a bit, or the Shan, and but this gives a little bit of evidence of how old this stuff is. And I wonder if this is a culture where, if there's archaeological evidence to show that this was a culture where people had to do the hunting and gathering, then my suspicion would be that this vessel was probably made by a woman. And the reason why that I would think that is because in cultures where people are hunting and gathering, generally, if the men are going to be gone, the women are the ones that are making the household implements. And that's something that is a complete guess, but it seems to be held up by some elements of archaeological debris that has been found. And so it wouldn't surprise me if the person who made that was a woman. And I love this kind of spiral texture. The spiral design is, men do use it as well, but there's a lot of thought that spiral design, since it relates around the world to ideas of death and birth, that spiral design seems to be a feminine design. But then we get right here where we have this jagged thing, and this sharp, pointy thing seems to be a masculine design. And I don't know who the people are that come up with those determinations, but it is very fascinating. And I look at how beautiful this is. You know, these are made a significant time apart from each other, but they're almost the same vessel. And I wonder. And you know, and how much of this are we just guessing? Well, I'm guessing everything, but how much of this do we think, yeah, that makes sense, and then maybe we'll find out we're completely and totally wrong. But you know, definitely watch that video. Oh, we're running out of time. I did want to show this this video. Again, I'm not going to have the sound on. These are essentially funerary figures, where they would be like toys that would be buried with the dead. So would you say that these are masculine or feminine appearing?
I would say these look a lot more feminine.
Yeah, I would agree. And
Almost
it looks
like
to
hair.
me, tell me if you agree. I guess no, this is an academic setting, so let me know if you concur. Uh, it looks to me like there are three different ages represented.
Oh yeah, I could see that.
How old, which do you think is the oldest figure?
The head is cut off on the far left figure, but to me, the way the middle one is sitting kind of looks older, but also the facial features on the far right one kind of looks maybe older as well. But that
Yeah,
could be
and
the
I
younger.
wonder,
I don't know.
to me, it looks like this one on the right is youngest. The one in the middle is matron, and the one on the left is like a happy grandma.
Yeah.
You know, I have no idea if that's the case, but it's very interesting to kind of look at those things. And then we look at a figure riding a horse. This could be a young man, or it could be a rather daring woman. This, however, I think, I mean, it's pretty obvious. What, you know, is this, what's the gender of this?
It looks like, yeah, for sure, a man with the beard and the fist
Yeah,
too is kind of masculine.
yeah. And we have these writers. So this looks to me like a soldier almost, or a prince. This looks to me kind of feminine. And this looks to me like it's either a teenager, a young boy, or a young woman.
Yeah.
But you know, I don't know. But that's what it appears to me to be. Now, would you say this figure is masculine or feminine?
That looks more masculine to me, but the hair
Yeah, it
definitely kind
does.
of looks really pretty.
Yeah, the hair is going crazy. Yeah, that's amazing. Now, they will also have these kinds of demon figures. And
Yeah.
what's kind of frustrating about the demon figures is a lot of them are going to be masculine, like you'd suspect, but some of them, when people can identify the name of the demon, you know from folklore or tradition that the name of the demon refers to a female demon. And it's designed to be like house guardians and stuff, and they look so outrageous because they're designed to scare things that are even scarier away. And I think that that's really fascinating. So I used to think they were all masculine, but when I read that really surprised me. Oh, here's the guy. Looks to me like he's getting ready to get a new job as a garden gnome. Oh, and here's that one figure that we saw on the left. And in this image, though, she looks like she could be a younger person. Definitely. The same figure. Would you say that this is masculine or feminine?
That looks masculine to me, but it does
Yeah,
have
it does.
round features, but I still just get that masculinity feeling from it.
Yeah, and I think the rounded features feel more that this person is healthy and well fed as opposed to being feminine. Ooh, I don't know about that. What's interesting to me is that a lot of these dragons traditionally are feminine, even though they look really, very scary. I also have a short video about landscape painting, and in Chinese Confucius landscape paintings, there are a set number of strokes, and the person is not supposed to be doing a documentary style imaging of the land in front of them. What they're supposed to be doing, and again, this is very Confucian, is sharing an idealized landscape, what it would look like if everything was in perfect harmony. So keep that in mind when you watch that video. But here we're looking at historical India. And this figure in the middle with the blue skin represents Shiva, or one of his incarnations. And a lot of the time his wife Shakti is depicted as gray or pink, with him being blue. And going through this, I would recommend very much reading or listening to the History of India in 12 minutes, and watching this crash course of history of science is very fascinating, because India has a lot of cultural weight and momentum to it as well, but it seems to be the mysticism that it's rooted in seems to be connected a little bit more with a practical appreciation of how the world works. Not necessarily our practical appreciation of how the world works, but something that functioned parallel to our appreciation of science for the ancient Indic peoples. I mentioned that there are 56 recognized, I believe, 54 or 56 recognized um, uh, ethnic groups in China. Would you believe that there's over 2,000 in India?
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing. I also found out that according to Christian tradition in India, um, Thomas the Apostle went to India after the death of Christ and converted enough Christians in India that they became a presence that's still there until today. And there are 4 tombs dedicated to the body of Christ in India, which I think is pretty cool. So they're Christians who believe in the resurrection, and they still built tombs for Jesus. So I thought that was pretty awesome. Now, there's a really quick video as well about Hinduism, and I think it's valuable. It's only about 1.5 minutes long, and so I'd like to pull that up. Give me just a second here. This is actually written by the Hindu Council of the Americas.
Karma, Dharma, Om, Namaste. All words you've probably heard. But how much do you know about their root? Hinduism. Hinduism embraces a diversity of teachings and practices. Unifying them is the knowledge that all of creation is divine. Hindus believe that the divine exists everywhere and in everything: plants, animals, and people. We view the oceans and mountains, wind and rain, sun, moon, and planets as divine. Hindus worship the divine in male and female forms, animal forms, and sometimes with no form at all. Hinduism is pluralistic, which means we know there is more than one way to know and experience the divine. Hindus know there is more to you than just your body and mind. The Atman or soul is a spark of God or the divine, which exists in all beings. The idea of karma comes from Hinduism. Your every thought and action has a reaction. Good thoughts and good deeds lead to positive outcomes. Bad ones lead to bad outcomes. Today, Hinduism is practiced by 1 billion people worldwide. It is inclusive and welcoming of diversity, and sees the whole world as one big family. To learn more, visit HinduAmerican.org. Hinduism is the earliest known
Sorry about
religion in the
that.
world.
All right. We're going to go back to the other thing. Then the next video is really good too. I'll put a link to that in the lesson. But that in a minute and a half, that pretty well is a good description of Hinduism. Now, what is fascinating to me about Hinduism is the idea, the pluralist idea, but also a very big part of the religion is the awareness, or the set of religions is the awareness that the universe was created by Shiva and Shakti, his consort, and they met each other in the cosmic emptiness and danced the world into being, and their dance was a euphemism for sex. So in religious settings, this kind of act between the two, the divine masculine and the divine feminine, becomes akin to a sacrament. And it's what's fascinating, interesting to me. You get things like we talk about tantra and different things like that in the West, and we think they're all nasty and kind of salacious, but that's because we're missing most of the context of these spiritual practices. So I think that the difference between what we see depicted in Hindu-inspired art and Western pornography is that Western pornography commodifies the individual and intimacy, and in Hindu-inspired art in India, it is much more a statement relating to that connection of divinity. And I scroll down a little bit. This is an important aspect of something that you'll see in a lot of Hindu temples and a lot of Hindu architecture in India. This is called a linga yoni sculpture, or a linga yoni votary. The vertical piece here is a linga or lingam, and the receptacle is a yoni. The yoni represents the sacred feminine, and the lingam represents the divine masculine. And balance, harmony, in some areas they associate it with the healthy cycle of crops and weather, come when these two ideas, the divine masculine and the divine feminine, are in harmony and balance. And in a lot of Indian architecture, you will see elements that make you think of the yoni, which is the feminine receptacle, and the lingam, which is the masculine structure. And, or for lack of a better term, the masculine plug. And it's this kind of idea can be really uncomfortable for Westerners because, of course, our minds all go to the sex word, and it is more about these are the set of symbols used to illustrate that the universe has to be in balance with both the divine masculine and the divine feminine. This is akin to, well, you shared that you were Christian. This is akin to the two angels on the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, where originally the two angels were understood to be the divine representation of the divine masculine and the divine feminine. It had to be two angels because that was a symbol for the covenants between God, the All-Father, with his creation or humanity, which represented the bride. And there's this, let's see, yeah, you can still see this, the science behind worship of yoni and linga. That's a really good article, video. It's about 5 minutes long, but the person talks about it and describes it. So if this kind of intimacy becomes akin in Hinduism to sacrament and votary expression. Votary is devotion. They come from the same root word, or religious observance. Then ideas about sexuality are going to be significantly different than they are in the West. And I included this video here as okay, we took that off. But this video here, the person talking, I really love how they explain it, but it makes a lot more sense to give us context for what we see in Hindu-inspired Indian art. So definitely watch that video as well. It's only 3.5 minutes long. I'm sorry, you're not even seeing what I'm seeing. There you go. It's this video, Homosexuality in Ancient India. It's a very different take on the idea and the expression of the idea than we're used to in the West. So it's only about 3.5 minutes long. So that's a good one. Then as we start looking at other things, we can look at ancient Indian architecture and start seeing a resonance with those ideas of the linga and yoni throughout. Let's see, I'm going to try. Okay, here we go. This is an example of Mughal architecture, which it's only about 600 years old. We can see that because of the way the columns are shaped, how the tops of the columns are shaped, and these lobed arches with the peak in the center. And going through this, I'm just going to go through it really quick. We start seeing dancing figures. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't understand in the West is that even though in Hinduism there might be 10,000 or 10 million gods, at the core, they're reflective of an idea that these are each facets of the same principle of divinity. You know, just as different Christians will have different perspectives on what God looks like. You know, is he like a bearded Charlton Heston, or is he like a baby in one of the Madonna and Child paintings? It doesn't change the nature of the divinity, but it does change. It adapts the approachability of the divinity to the worshiper. So, I mean, you know, this may very well be, oh, what's her name? A Kali sculpture, you know, a happy dancing Kali. I'm thinking that just because of the chest area, it seems a little bit more bumped out, but maybe I'm just reading that. And it could also be a Shiva depiction. Both of those are, Kali is the aspect of divinity that represents the divine feminine in her role to tear things down and rebuild. You know, and in a lot of these cultures that have personified different aspects of divinity, most of the divine figures have aspects that we can think of as either positive or negative. A positive aspect of Kiva would be, I'm sorry, not of Kiva, but of Kali, would be you use manure to fertilize a field so that the crops grow. The negative aspect would be that something has to die for that, you know, plants have to die for that animal to process the plants and make the manure. And if this is Shiva, Shiva exists outside of time as we're used to it. And so a lot of the time Shiva may be shown with multiple arms because he can do many things at once beyond the understanding of humankind. So as this aspect of divinity, I'm sorry, you're not seeing this, are you? Can you see it now?
Yes.
I'm sorry, you need to tell me to put a pin when I'm going on describing something that you can't see. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're good. I saw it in my head.
But you know, the lobing in that Mughal architecture. Oh, you didn't see that. So let's see. I'm gonna. Okay, this is an example of Mughal architecture, which is used. They're Muslim-inspired buildings, and you have see that how the columns, instead of being round, they have these vertical facets. And you see the arches have these scallops in them or lobes, and they're peaked in the center. And that temple structure that we were just looking at with a divine figure in it, this is much older, but the Mughals really depended heavily for stylistic choices on that older architecture because they knew they were viewed as interlopers, so they tried to connect themselves to historical Hindu and architecture. And you can see those vertical facets on the columns and those lobes or scallops in the arches here as well. I would like you to go through, this is about a 12-minute video, so go, great ads. Go through the video, try not to get irritated as I do at the ads, and then see what you can learn regarding the architecture. And a good way to do that is to apply those principles of artistic critique that we talked about. Now, the Vitala temple is incredibly ornate, and you'll see that it's decorated. The textures, sometimes when you get in close, you realize that the textures are actually people, and that's true of a lot of these things. And because they were expressing that connection to the divine dance of the universe through, we'll just call it erotic art. And these are examples of the Indian version of the Buddha, and the features are quite a bit more feminine. And this is an example of the Dharmic wheel. And we'll look here. Now, look at this. Would you say that this building looks feminine or masculine?
If I had to put a gender to it, I think I would say feminine.
Yeah, this was built as a monument and resurrection chamber to the builder's favorite wife. And so it is, the entire thing is meant to exude or bring the visitor into mindfulness of the divine feminine. There's an awful lot of structures that are carved into mountains as well. And there's aspects of it where some of them feel to me like they're more masculine than others. This, for example, feels to me, it's a temple, but it feels to me like it's meant to be almost a military site for defense. This feels very masculine, where the Taj Mahal feels very feminine. And here we start seeing some of those depictions of human forms that, from a Western perspective, look erotic, and a lot of them will be erotic, but this deals directly with that dance of creation that is a celebration of Lord Krishna, or the dance of Shiva and Shakti. And some of the forms, like this, feels like a feminine form. And what's interesting is that sometimes the bodies will appear to be of one gender, and then there'll be gender indicators to kind of a different gender. So the gender separation seems to be more fluid. And here we get a lot of figures as well. I wish we could get a little bit closer. Ganesh is usually masculine, and this looks like a masculine figure to me, but tell me if you see it too. It feels to me like this is almost a feminine stance.
Yeah, I totally agree. It almost looks like her hips, or the hip is popping out a little bit.
Yeah, and you'll see that quite a bit too. That kind of stance is a feminine stance in some of these Eros temples that you can see in India, because there is a specific dance that calls to mind the wedding dance of Shiva and Shakti, where the woman will stand like that. So it's very interesting, but it's fascinating to me because this looks like it might be a masculine figure. Now this, maybe I'm reading into it, but this feels to me it harkens back a little bit to that idea of that picture of the lingam and yoni right here. We see that the relatively flat platform that represents the yoni and this vertical structure that represents the lingam. And I think that that's really interesting. Do you see that as well in this little area that's up above?
Yeah, it is interesting, just the flat surfaces and the way that it was very interesting architecture.
Yeah. So it feels like this is the flat bed representing the receptacle of the yoni and the vertical structure representing the plug of the lingam. And sometimes the artwork wasn't overtly sexual. This is a history narrative panel that shows a specific event with a lot of the figures. Think like Trajan's column. And some of the architecture was just absolutely astounding. Here's some more. Let's see. In this particular temple that was carved, what is fascinating to me is this was long enough ago that the people who carved this, all of this is carved into the stone itself. It's not made separately and brought in. It was all carved into the stone. And what's amazing to me is that it happened over a period of about 40 years. And in order for it to have happened with how we understand their technological level at the time, they would have had to have 10,000 people working on this every day for each day of those 40 years because of how much work this is. But it almost looks like lace up here. And we see that there's all these figures right here. And the figures remind me of that same kind of dancey kind of pose that we see. And a lot of these figures are, well, this is very obviously masculine. And what's the genre of this one? I'm sorry, not genre, it's gender. What's the gender of this figure?
Very feminine.
Yeah, very obviously feminine. It kind of, there's features that are reminiscent of the Venus of Willendorf almost.
Yeah.
Except this one, she has a face and an identity.
What would you say are the little statues at their side? Because I don't think they look like kids. Are they supposed to be like little gods, or maybe they are kids?
Well, there's a lot of the times there's a hierarchy of size that is meant to give a perspective on social hierarchy. And sometimes the size is just a demonstration of narrative as well. An example of that is these little vignettes right here. This is a demonstration of narrative, which kind of gives background information for this figure in the middle. But these figures, they don't feel to me like children at all. They could be divine servants, an equivalent to an angel, or they could be normal size representations of normal size human beings meant to serve the divine, with the divine figure being so much larger because he's meant to be shown as having a lot more power than the lowly humans. So I don't believe that these are children. I agree with that. It'd be interesting to find out more about this structure. But we see very specifically 3 different levels of size. But I think like these are static. And in these carved vignettes, I think they're narratives. With these figures actually interacting, I think they're most like either humans or God-given servants, like angels or something along those lines. What do you think? What's the feeling you get?
Yeah, I like that. It reminds me of when we learned in my other art history class when, the bigger subject is supposed to represent like how much more divine they are, and then the smaller subject is less divine. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's not because you actually had an 18-foot tall person walking around. It's an ideological difference in size. That's what it feels like to me. I think these are absolutely astounding. So, explore this. We see that kind of lobed, or this isn't quite scalloped. This is more of a vaulting, but it's interesting to me just the different. And here we do see scalloped arches, but it's interesting to me to see this kind of really stable, strong architecture, and these elements feel a little bit more martial to me and feel a little bit more masculine. And then when you get to the scalloped arches, as opposed to having these rigid lines here, the scallops make me feel like it's a little bit more feminine. But I imagine a lot of that is me just applying my own narrative bias to it. Then I also have, we are almost done. I also have a video about painting from early times that I wanted to share. And this is another one of these examples. From the Western eye, this looks very erotic, approaching pornography, because here's a man with something around his waist, and he's being served by numberless topless women. But when we look at in through the lens of religion, this becomes somebody representing a Shiva or Krishna figure, and then the figures around him represent women that represent his consort or Shakti. So it's not necessarily meant to be a bordello scene, but it could very well be part of a sacred story. Pretty much guarantee, though, you get in a lot of trouble if you shared anything like that in Sunday school. Now, looking at this, it's pretty obviously what the gender indicators are here. But looking at this next, this is also a cave painting. What gender of people are involved in this?
I think the first two on the right both look male. I think they're all male, actually, maybe.
Yeah, it looks to me like they are all male. And it looks to me like they are young men and boys. Because there's no gender indicator for this person in the center. Looks like that's probably a boy because there's no beard and there's no gender indicator showing that he's a woman. Now this is not hard to guess. This is fascinating to me because it shows the diversity of cultures and ethnicities in the continent of India, or the subcontinent, because you have people of, a rainbow of hues. But what's the obvious gender?
They're all male.
Yeah, I think so. And here we have a lot of those narrative vignettes. So these each represent an aspect of a divine story. And this person is most likely, I'm going to guess Shiva, an incarnation of Shiva. So, and these figures, a lot of the times, like in Western medieval art, angels were shown as being androgynous a lot of the time. But in a lot of this Hindu-inspired Indian art, we get angels who are very feminine, but are empowered as either creative or destructive forces in their responsibilities as messengers to the divine. So, even if you saw a woman like this, who's very much a woman, even if you had a tank or a howitzer, it'd be a really bad idea to mess with her, because she is obviously very feminine, but she's also very obvious in the narrative structure, and with the wings that she has, she's a badass. Okay, so don't pick a fight with her, is what I'm saying. And these are much older cave paintings. I think this gives a lot of credibility to the notion that our ancestors, even though they did not have cell phones, still understood art the same way we do. These look very realistic silhouettes. They're stylized, and here's some more. That style of cave painting that is. This looks a lot like Lascaux, but this is in India. Very, very similar, very stylized, yet naturalistic as well. This reminds me of Picasso. It's not. It was several thousand years before Picasso was around, but that's what it reminds me of. And then these are miniature paintings. There's a particular style that I find hard to look at because there's so much going on. But all these decorations demonstrate the wealth of the family. Now, where are the men in this picture?
I do not see any men. I don't. Unless are they at the very, very bottom?
Right
Are
here
those
on the right-hand side?
too?
It looks to me like this is jewelry instead of a beard.
Yeah.
That's what I'm seeing. I'm thinking this looks like it's prepping a wedding party. And the only person not wearing any jewelry is this person here on the left. I'm thinking this might be the man. Because everybody else has jewelry and painting on their hands. Nose rings and ear hoops. What do you think? Does that sound right?
Have sleeves like the other ones do either, like the decorative sleeves. So that is interesting. Right. They're all wearing skirts, and it does not look like that one's wearing a skirt. Just more decorative pants almost.
Yeah. So something like that, we apply our own Western perspective for clothing and stuff. We just can't help it. It's automatic. And, you look at this reminds me of, I don't know, it looks like either a mom and her sister or a mom and her grown daughter. And then has a child right here, a little baby. Oh, this is not in focus at all. Okay, this is in focus. Now this is interesting to me because it looks like it should be erotic, but it's also, there's no men present at all. These are all women. So if it is intended for a woman audience, it's going to mean something very specifically different than what we would guess from a Western perspective. Now in this appears to me to be, this is a lone man. It may very well be that this is all of his wives. That's what it looks like to me. And here, we saw that the wedding on the other side where it was only one man. I see only one woman. And she's dancing. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I'm sorry, I've gone over time a little bit. I just got excited because it's fascinating to me how much we can read into this, and there's a constant struggle to try to curtail our Western perspective as we look at the art of other cultures. And it's, when we're able to do that, I think it's a lot easier for us not to be offended. And I just want to say to everybody, those last two videos, there's a couple videos in there. If you don't want to watch them, that's okay. There's plenty of other material. And as you work through this and do your writing for this week, think about how gender is portrayed. And you could also address, how is this different from your expectations? So, there's some good things to think about, but we covered a lot of material fairly quickly. Well, thank you, Morgan, so much for joining me today.
Yeah, of course.
I think you single-handedly doubled the size of the class, so thank you. And, but I will. Last week I had an emergency and I did not finish putting everything online like I needed to. Part of that is the discovery and research projects. I will put that up. Again, I wanted to reiterate for everybody that when you see due dates, they are things to kind of guide us along. So if it seems like things are too crowded together, whatever like that, let me know. And but it's designed to just kind of help push us along. And they're not designed to give me an opportunity to dock people points. The biggest thing about the research and discovery projects is to make sure that you connect them somehow with the subject of the course that we're in. And I am happy to extend leeway as far as I need to with it. You know, if you can be creative about how you connect that, you know, we'll do whatever we can. Well, we'll do as much as we can to hopefully get it to work. All right. Well, that's it for me. I'm signing off. Thank you very much, Morgan, for joining me. I hope you and everybody else in the class has an absolute wonderful week and weekend. And I will look forward to talking to you again next Tuesday.
Thank you.